Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar on K-2 Performance Tools Pilot and SRCL Subgrants. My name is Jill Slack, and I manage the kindergarten through grade 2 activities at the department, as well as the Striving Readers Comprehensive Literacy Program grant, also known as SRCL. 3 items to note before we begin. First, a link to this webinar deck is now available in the application, found at the link in yesterday's newsletter. Second, a recorded version of this webinar will be available by tomorrow morning in the application as well. And third, we'd love to hear from you during the webinar, so if you have any questions regarding the application, feel free to jot those in the chat box. And we'll pause periodically to address these questions, as well as have time at the end of the webinar to answer these questions. Let's take a look at our agenda for today's webinar. So first, what we'll do is talk about the challenges in measuring K-2 performance, as well as provide a vision for K-2 classrooms and accountability. Next, we'll talk about the Louisiana primary review, and then we'll move into the SRCL Subgrants and SRCL Subgrants timeline and next steps. The challenges in measuring K-2 performance, you know, Louisiana has a long history of accountability aligned to the academic focuses or focus on grades 3 to 12. It has really extended accountability to publicly funded early childhood programs. However, Louisiana currently lacks measures to reflect success in grades K-2 specifically. Schools serving grades K-2 only are also evaluated based on their paired school where students matriculate to 3rd grade. K-2 leaders of these schools have expressed ongoing frustration with this policy, which does not recognize the work that happens in these lower grades. Additionally, Louisiana's move to a greater focus on student progress in grades 4 to 12 does not offer a solution to measuring student growth in schools ending in 3rd grade. This led us to create a vision for what good instruction or high-quality instruction looks like in K-2 classrooms. This vision, which we recently introduced at the summit this past summer, is here on this slide, and it entails that all young children will be ready to master skills and content knowledge aligned to grade level, age-appropriate content standards in order to be academically successful in 3rd grade and beyond. There are 4 actions that you see on this slide to make that vision become a reality. And that is that teachers provide strong, active instruction to make sure all students learn through purposeful play and exploration, that all students read and write about text to build knowledge and fluency, and they engage in meaningful conversations around read-alouds of complex text, and that they solve real-world math problems that require them to apply their understandings in increasingly sophisticated ways. We also have a vision for K-2 accountability with 4 actions that you see here on this slide. And that vision for K-2 accountability is to define a cohesive set of expectations for teachers and school systems first through grade 12 or through grade 2. Utilize a limited, coherent, and efficient set of tools to monitor outcomes across districts and schools. Provide maximum consistency across grade levels to support ease of use by educators. And even more importantly, to reflect the academic goals of K-2 in a way that schools are measured. This led us to the Louisiana primary review. With the Louisiana primary review, we involved a work group of K-2 teachers, school leaders, and system administrators from across the state this past spring to inform the development of a K-2 accountability system. And when we asked them to consider what excellence looks like in the classroom, their definitions of excellence fell into 3 categories that you see here on this slide. School and school system supports, which is the base for the other 2 categories. And the other 2 categories are classroom experiences, or classroom experience, the engagement experience in the classroom, and mastery of foundational skills, which has to do with progress on standards-aligned instruction and achievement for children. We'll talk a little bit more about these pillars on the next few slides. So this working group recommended to us for the 2 categories, classroom experience and mastery of foundational skills, that we call it 4 tools, 2 tools in each category. And these tools are reflected here on this slide. For classroom experience, they recommended that we pilot kindergarten in class. Many of you know that we have piloted kindergarten in class this past school year, and we will continue that pilot next school year. So the kindergarten class tool will be one of the tools that we'll be piloting for the K-2 accountability purposes. Another tool will be a review of standards implementation in grades K-2. This will be reflected through a curriculum observation checklist that we'll discuss on the next couple of slides. And then for the mastery of foundational skills category, they recommended that we do a review of student work samples, specifically student writing samples, and we'll talk about what that entails in just a few minutes. And also an age-appropriate, standards-aligned second grade skills checkup for ELA and math. So these are the 4 tools that we're going to be piloting this upcoming school year, and you will have the opportunity to apply to participate in this pilot, to pilot one of these 4 tools, 2 of these tools, 3 or all 4 of these tools.
What did it say? I had really been on there.
Okay, so the details on these tools are here on this slide. Let's spend a few minutes talking about this. So the first tool is the kindergarten class tool. This is our 2nd year piloting the class in kindergarten. For those who are not aware, the class tool, it measures and improves student-teacher interactions that promote positive social and academic development. If you choose that tool to implement, we're going to ask that you do the observations in the fall and spring and submit that data to us, but there will also be third-party evaluations involved in that tool. The second tool is curriculum implementation, or standards-aligned practices. And this is basically a checklist with 7 or so indicators on it that are aligned to best practices in standards-aligned instruction. This is to measure and strengthen teachers' use of materials that impact student learning experiences. And this will be a third-party observation that will be conducted. This checklist, if any of you are involved with the redesign efforts, is very similar to the checklist that you've seen for ELA and math, with a particular emphasis and focus on K-2. The third tool is the student writing samples. We have a rubric that was vetted, validated, and beta tested that we will be using to measure students' written expression and knowledge of language and conventions. And like the previous tool, this will be a third-party review via an online portal. And then finally, we're going to be piloting a second grade ELA and math checkup at the end of the school year, which is computer-based administration. However, a limited number of paper-based copies will be available when there are accessibility issues. This is to measure students' mastery of ELA and math skills that meet the standards. So we're inviting you to participate in this pilot of 1 to 4 tools. And if you choose the class tool to pilot in kindergarten, the training dates are in September. There are actually 2 days of training that you must attend, and those days are in September. However, those trainings are going to be offered multiple times in multiple locations throughout the state for ease of traveling and so forth. So there is a link in the application as well as on this slide here that defines the dates and locations for these trainings. The trainees will be school principals or teacher evaluators, anyone who evaluates teachers. And once again, we'll ask that you observe teachers in the fall and observe teachers in the spring and submit that data to us. For the student writing sample evaluation, that's for just grade 1. We'll do a webinar in the fall to review the rubric, which I mentioned previously has been validated as a standards-aligned tool to Louisiana's student standards. That will be the training, those who will be trained on that tool are given information on the use of that tool will be local instructional leaders and teachers, and we'll collect that data in the spring, the student writing samples. The next tool is the ELA and Math Curriculum Observation Checklist, the standards-aligned checklist. There is no training provided on that, but we will be piloting that in grades 1 and 2 and collecting data between November and February on that tool. And then finally, the ELA and Math Checkup for grade 2. We'll have a winter webinar plus subsequent technical assistance for principals, assessment coordinators, and teachers with an administration date in April. So we're going to use the SRCL subgrants to support the implementation of these pilots. And that said, many of you know that we have the birth through grade 5 subgrant initiative. So what we're going to do is we're going to break apart that birth to grade 5 into 3 opportunities. School systems will be able to apply for 1, 2, or all 3 of these age bands. There will be an opportunity to apply for birth to age 5 funds, kindergarten through grade 2, and grades 3 to 5. The tools that we just talked about are for the kindergarten through grade 2 subgrants. So school systems may apply for 1 subgrant in each of the age bands that you see on here on this slide for up to 10 schools serving the greatest % of disadvantaged youth. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into the application itself in just a second. We anticipate awarding subgrants ranging from $87,000 plus to $140,000 plus, depending upon the grade span. So for birth to age 5, we plan on awarding, tentatively right now, 40 subgrants up to $87,000 plus each. For kindergarten through grade 2, where the greatest focus of these funds are placed due to the piloting of these performance tools, we plan on awarding 40 subgrants up to $140,000 plus each. And of course, that's also going to be dependent upon the number of tools you decide to pilot in classrooms. And you'll be expected to reserve or dedicate approximately 20% of those funds or $28,000 approximately for pilot services. And then there's the grade 3 to grade 5 opportunity. We plan on or anticipate awarding 40 subgrants for up to $105,000 plus each. Now, if you apply for the kindergarten through grade 2 application or subgrant, you'll receive a base allocation, and then we'll make a determination about how much more you will receive based on the number of tools that you decide to, the number of tools in classrooms, the number of classrooms you decide to pilot these tools in. So we anticipate with the base allocation and piloting these tools in a specific number or a certain number of classrooms that the award will be up to $140,000 plus. So here is what the application looks like, basically. It's centered around these criteria that you see here on this slide. It's a simple one-page application, basically, for each of the age bands, birth to age 5, K2, and 3-5. And a one-page application for each of those age bands. For kindergarten through grade 2, there's an additional section on the pilot tools that the K2 applicants will need to complete. And I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. But overall, what you see on this slide, applications will be evaluated according to the following criteria, or the criteria you see on this slide, and funds will be awarded to the highest ranked applications. There's a link to the allowables and frequently asked questions on this deck as well as in the application. So let's move into the application itself. This section that you see right here on this slide is just for kindergarten through grade 2. It's the section that kindergarten through grade 2 applicants must complete, and these applicants must select at least one pilot tool to implement in at least one grade level listed in their grant application. In the unshaded boxes, you're to indicate the number of classrooms that will implement each tool or the tools you decide to pilot. And you'll also complete a form that lists a roster of teachers who will pilot those tools, and that's linked in the application. Please read the K2 pilot summary linked in the application for more information and expectations. Okay, so all 3 age band applicants must complete these 3 sections. The first is section A, which is the project schools and sites. You're to list the schools, up to 10 schools, that you propose to be in your application. And the number of, this is an example for the K2, the number of students served, that percent of economically disadvantaged children for those age levels, the percent of English learners for those age levels, and the percent of students with disabilities for those age levels. This is a requirement, a federal requirement of the SRCL grant, that we pay very close attention to those percentages, because the grant funds are supposed to be allocated to schools and school districts with the greatest percent of disadvantaged youth, as characterized by these 3 categories that you see here. Of course, you'll add spaces depending upon the number of schools you have in your application. The second component is the project design, and we're simply asking you to list the proposed curriculum the proposed assessments and the proposed PD that you are going to implement as a result of these circle funds, should you be awarded. And then the third part is a project budget. There's a template provided for you. It's a fill-in template to prepare an initial budget. This initial budget is for October 1, 2018 to September 30th, 2019, and you should prepare a budget not to exceed the top allocation amount discussed on the previous slides. You should also adhere to the allowables. There's a link to the allowables, clear and concise link to the allowables. And then for K2, you should budget 20% of your total budget to Object Code 300 for Pilot Tool Services. This is defined in the application, so pay attention to that guidance as you complete the application. Now, I do want to say if you are awarded a subgrant, this does not mean that the department approves all content, activities, or expenses described in the application or the budget itself that you submitted with your application. Revisions are to be expected, and the department may change the amount of the award based on the number of students served and the number of tools piloted in classrooms. Just wanted to be clear on that regard. So what's the timeline for these circle subgrants, and what are some next steps? Here's the timeline. As you know, we released the application just yesterday. Today's the webinar. We're going to have some office hours to answer any questions you have regarding the development of your application or the application itself on July 2nd. From 10 to 11 a.m. and then once again on July 10th, 9 to 10 a.m. We know once you get into actually developing your application, that's when you begin to have your most pointed questions, and we want to be available to answer any of your questions. Plus, it's an opportunity for you to hear what other school systems' questions are and hear the responses to those. The applications are due July 23rd. Per the instructions provided in the application itself. Applicants will be notified of their awards on or around August 10th. And then the BESI will approve those allocations on August 15th with the funds available to be used October 1st of this year through September 30th of next year. So on the front end, we're going to go to BESI in August so that we can get all these funds uploaded into EGMS and that you can prepare a budget so that you can begin using these funds October 1 of this year. So what are some next steps? Consult with your network staff about the application and any questions you have regarding the application. In the meantime, before we have the office hours, July 2nd, we're certainly available at the department in addition to the network staff to answer any questions, but your network staff are the first point of contact with this application and any questions that you have. Also attend the office hours offered on July 2nd or July 10th, and then complete the application and submit it by July 23rd.